A new op-ed out today, and it's by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and he is defending diplomacy efforts when it comes to North Korea. Mr. Tillerson says he's very proud of the administration despite facing, quote, immense challenges. And I quote from the op-ed, Americans should be encouraged by the progress the State Department and United States Agency for International Development have made in pushing for global peace and stability. Our peaceful pressure campaign has cut off roughly 90% of North Korea's export revenue, much of which is used to fund illegal weapons development. He goes on to say a key component to this strategy is continued pressure on China. But how do you like this? U.S. spy satellites have reportedly captured photos of Chinese ships illegally selling oil to North Korea on these boats 30 times since October. My goodness. To which the president tweeted, caught red-handed, very disappointing that China is allowing oil to go into North Korea. There will never be a friendly solution to the North Korea problem if this continues to happen. Joining me right now, former UN Ambassador John Bolton, also a Fox News contributor. Ambassador Bolton, you warned of this. Right here on this show, you said, China, they may sign on to sanctions, but it doesn't mean they will follow them. And sure enough, here we are, and it sure doesn't look like they are following them.
Yeah, I think these pictures are really a fire bell in the night for those who think that the sanctions are ultimately going to stop the North Korean nuclear weapons program. The objective is not simply to get them back to the negotiating table, because that'll simply produce the same result we've had the past 25 years, which is we negotiate endlessly and they continue to make progress toward deliverable nuclear weapons. And I think the president is right in that tweet. We are running out of time. He was counting, or at least hoping, that the Chinese would take really dispositive action to deal with North Korea, which they certainly have the capability to do. These pictures give the lie to that. It's just fascinating to watch the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson try to explain this. She says, well, are those particular ships listed by the Security Council? Because if they're not in violation of the sanctions. Of course, I don't know anything about these ships, but, I mean, it's a charade, and they were caught, and there's a lesson there.
I would add to that North Korea's economy, Ambassador, grew 3.9% last year. 3.9%. I mean, that's some pretty solid growth for an economy that's only 28 billion, roughly estimated, in size. And their number one trade partner is China. So they can't grow without China. It tells you that China is there helping to support the area. Some people have said to me, and I wonder if you agree with this, well, maybe China really does want Kim Jong-un there. Maybe China is using that sort of as a buffer, and they don't want to unify that peninsula, because then we would have too much influence over there. What do you say to that?
Well, it's certainly the traditional Chinese position that they don't want reunification, except if it's North Korea that takes over South Korea, which obviously we don't accept. There is, however, a growing body of opinion in China that looks at North Korea and says this is a pretty ugly piece of baggage for us to have to carry around. And the real threat of North Korea's nuclear capability could inspire Japan, or maybe even South Korea, to get their own nuclear capability, which would be a direct threat to China. So I do think there's a diplomatic play here with China on reunification. It's not clear that we're pursuing it. Secretary Tillerson has said repeatedly we don't seek reunification or regime change in North Korea. I think that's a mistake.
You do, but if he were to say that, how would that change the equation? What would that add?
Well, I think the discussion that should be had is not necessarily in public, but in private with China, which would imply you don't necessarily say anything about reunification or regime change. But let's be clear what the policy of the United States should be. The threat of the North Korean nuclear weapon is really the threat of the North Korean regime. And until that regime disappears, I don't think there's any long-term chance to avoid this problem. The president's been very clear at his speech to the UN in September. He said denuclearization of North Korea is the only way forward. Now, if you believe that and you don't see any diplomatic road to achieve it, and I think that's basically where we are, that's why you have to look at military force. Not that the president wants to do it, but he's now faced with the due bill for 25 years of failed American policy. And it's not just failure on North Korea. this represents or could represent the collapse of half a century of American efforts to prevent nuclear proliferation.
I know you believe that. I just, I want to think that before we go down that path, there are other things economically, Ambassador, that we can do.
We've gone down that path for 25 years.
No.
25 years.
We've sanctioned one lousy Chinese bank. There's a whole lot more that we can sanction, Ambassador. We can start cutting off trade with China. There's a lot of economic options nobody's even talking about.
You're just wrong on that, and here's the reason why. To inflict real pain on China, real pain, American business would have to feel pain, and they're not up for it. Leaving China out of the picture, do you think Iran cares a whit about the Security Council sanctions on North Korea? And they will do what they can to supply oil to North Korea as well.
So you're telling me, Ambassador Bolton,
Russians.
But I want to back up to what you said about American business. You're telling me American business will not stand for us saying, no, you're not going to trade with China. They would rather see lives lost in a military option than lose a few bucks on trade with China.
You tell me what the effect would be of a statute or the equivalent executive order that said we will not do business with Chinese banks.
You'd have a trade war, sure. But I'd rather have a trade war than an actual war.
Yeah, look, I think even if the result were a successful trade war, by then North Korea would already have nuclear weapons. Mike Pompeo, the director of the CIA, said a few months ago that they would have the capability, could have the capability to deliver thermonuclear weapons on target in the United States within a matter of months. Now, that means they could be there already. I think they will certainly be there by the end of the year unless we take action. And here's the trade-off. The test here is not the world as it is today compared to a world after a preemptive strike against North Korea's nuclear weapons program. The comparison is the world after that strike versus a world where North Korea has nuclear weapons it can use or sell to anybody.
Well, I'm as passionate as you, Ambassador, on not wanting them to have the ability to hurt us like they can. And that needs to change. But I think we differ in that I do think we haven't even scratched the surface of what we can do to China economically. And it makes sense for the President to explore, and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin to explore every single one of those options. Business
See what you can do in the next 6 months. And then if they have nuclear weapons at that point, because we didn't have adequate intelligence and they crossed the finish line while we were fooling around with sanctions, then you can tell me what you think
I'm talking about a whole lot more than fooling around with sanctions. I'm talking about actually enforcing them. Ambassador Bolton, forgive me, I have no more time.
The U.S. Navy in to enforce them. That's how it works.
Thank you, sir. Always good to see you.